Hey, this is Pops, and I want to talk about the Creature Commandos. That's right, one of the projects that James Gunn teased and said, hey, we're going to get at some point.
This first chapter is called Gods and Monsters. The first project is Creature Commandos. Creature Commandos is an animated series. I've written all the episodes. Something we're going to do that's a little bit different at DC is we're going to have characters move into animation, out of animation, usually having the same actor play their voice as who plays them in live action.
And I thought, well, I mean, I'm kind of familiar with this, but it's not something that I've read a lot of. I did run across some of it during my Flashpoint reread, but I wanted to really get to the nitty gritty. Maybe kind of give you guys an idea of like what could we actually expect from the series. I think the interesting thing is it could either go really, really well or really, really bad. I tend to lean towards really, really good because it's basically Suicide Squad meets Monster Squad. Okay, the origins date all the way back to Weird War Tales in 1993. They did this little creative story of basically like how could they make a Frankenstein, a Dracula werewolf. So they have someone who stepped on, I think it was a landmine, and they die. They basically get turned into a Frankenstein. They do all these experiments. Then you have the criminal who doesn't have any choice and basically submits himself to experimentation. They subject him to vampire bats. That's interesting concept for him to basically become a Dracula. And then, of course, the mental ill patient, Warren Griffith, who becomes the werewolf. He's suffering from lycanthropy, I think is how you would say that appropriately. And then they basically are just like put into Suicide Squad scenarios where they're fighting the Yazis back in the war, all these different moments. And you even have you even have a couple famous issues because you have some sort of interpretation of the famous German leader on the cover of those comics, even to the point you have like German children like praising him, like, "Hey, aren't you great?" Blah blah blah. So it really is also like war propaganda as well, a little bit, which I think is something that's interesting. I'm not sure it's something that is what they're going to be interested in translating. And I know there has been like a TV animation thing that has been done. I don't know a ton about it. I'm not going to pretend. But I can say this is where you start to get into the shift where things could go very badly because they keep adding characters in the comic book lore. So, you get, Bogman, who's the creature from the Black Lagoon. You get a mummy. You get Medusa. You have different characters that kind of come along the way. And even into modern times with the reboot, you have some other characters that come into play. They're not. I'm not trying to say they're bad. I'm just saying that by the time you get through the long and story history with the different series, I really didn't care, especially for the art of the Truman Eaton series. I think the art and just I mean talk about like a total bad 90s, like the bad take on the 90s was about them all using guns and stuff. Like it becomes so much less interesting about the characters that they went through so much trouble to create that they sort of like lost sight of that, and they're all just toting giant guns, and it actually is kind of almost silly, right? You do get into like the cyborg at that point where they have that character in there as well with more experimentation, and he's freaking out and some cool things, and you have like these, you know, big busty characters, and that's kind of the way things float along until probably about 2009 or so, right? You kind of get into this Action Comics issue where you see them again with Superman. It's called The Startling Return of the Creature Commandos. And Jeff Johns writes this. So I think it's very interesting, Jeff Johns. And I didn't get a chance to reread this before doing this video, so I would like to kind of get into that. And obviously, I mentioned there was a Flashpoint version, which I don't really care for too much. And then when you get into like these different modern, the more of the stuff that's more recent, I will say this is where I have concern, right? Because this is really like the stereotype of where they've gone with comic books, where like the history of, the vampire and Frankenstein and Wolfman, then of course Medusa. Well, now they've added so many other characters, and then you can see this is a screenshot that I was able to get here and hold on to, was that all the ladies are front and center. It's like there's 4 of them, 5 of them there. It's like Okay. I, I'm not going to pretend that I think James Gunn is great, that I think that he has a great history with writing Superman, or that I have a ton of faith in him being the creative leader of all of this. But I will say I liked The Suicide Squad. I think he did a good job with the elements of um, the Guardians of the Galaxy took everybody, I think, by surprise. I know it did me. And I would say that if there's a chance to make some of this interesting and likable, he probably has a good chance of doing that. I actually was a little surprised it was animation. I actually was more hopeful they were going to go with some sort of live action project to try to really kind of get the ball rolling with something that they could do quickly, tie it in with the stuff from the Suicide Squad. I've heard now that they've said that there is a good chance that it's going to also include the Weasel, who was in the Suicide Squad. Of course, it ends with him running off into the jungle. I'm not going to be opposed to those type of things. I've said that I don't totally buy that all of what they have done is going to be erased. You know, the Henry Cavill, Ben Affleck, these kinds of things. Sure, but I have no reason until I see otherwise that Peter Safran's going to step aside for the things that he's put his name on, that he won't try to find ways to keep them going. And if that includes James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, then maybe there is still some stuff that floats around into these projects. Because at the end of the day, this is the arena of hope that I have, that money matters and that they make something good and interesting that we want to go see and that we want to enjoy. Will that manifest? I don't know. This will be a very early litmus test because I guess this is supposed to be one of the first projects that's supposed to land. I'd love your thoughts on it. Maybe you've read a lot more of this. I would say right now, of the things that I have not read, I haven't touched base on the Jeff Johns part of it and try to get into that story arc and see more of that modern interpretation, as well as the animation stuff. I have revisited this and I don't know how long. So I may end up trying to work that in. And if there are something of significance there, I may do another video. Unless you guys want me to do more videos. My next step is to do a video on All-Star Superman, which I want to revisit. I love this story. I think it's one of the better Superman limited series that's been done in the last few years. Grant Morrison, I think, did a great job. I think it's a very nice, all-encompassing miniseries as well. There probably are a couple red flags, though. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm not sure how that's going to translate. But, you know, let's go with it and see what happens. I'm also not convinced that's 100% what they're going to go for. So, anyway, this is my thoughts on Creature Commandos. I know it's kind of got like some mixed responses from fans. Love to see your thoughts, if you're looking forward to this or not. If I'm am I off base, on base? What do you guys think as far as my focus on this franchise is? So appreciate your time. Thank you so much. I am Pops.